So, if we go onto Google Maps and we look up the country of Ukraine, we can see that it is a country in Eastern Europe. It's a pretty big one at that. Look how big this boy is. All right. Look how big he is. Big old country. You'll also notice that Ukraine is located in pretty close proximity to another country called Russia. Russia's huge, all right? Russia's all of this shit right here, all right? And if we scroll in really, really close, right, we can find a small little peninsula, islandish kind of thing. It's definitely a peninsula. A little place right here called Crimea, all right? There's a lot of contention about Crimea, all right? In 2014, Russia invaded Crimea because of reasons, which we'll get into, all right? The reason why I want to talk about this right now is because of this headline. Ukraine says Russia has nearly 100,000 troops near its border. And we'll read this very short article and then we'll get into it. Ukrainian President Zelensky, Volodymyr Zelensky has said there are nearly 100,000 Russian troops near Ukraine's border and that Western countries had shared information about active Russian troop movements with Kiev. I hope the whole world can now clearly see who wants peace and who is concentrating nearly 100,000 soldiers at our border. The Russian troop movements near the Ukrainian border have spurred fears of a possible attack. Moscow has dismissed such suggestions as inflammatory and complained about increasing activity in the region by the NATO Transatlantic Alliance. So why is this a big deal? Well, quick little history lesson. All right, in 2014, Russia was high on its fucking rockers, and they thought, you know what? Ukraine's going through some stuff right now. They have a little bit of a civil war going on, right? Some people took over Kiev. They had just had like the whole civil war there. We can take over this very, very important strategic area right here of Crimea, right? And so they rolled in and just fucking took it, right? A lot of people will say that they voted to join Russia, but they voted to join Russia after Russia rolled in there with a fuck-ass load of tanks and a fuck-ass load of soldiers, right? The civil war in Ukraine is still technically ongoing, and there's a lot of separatists that are funded by Russia. Russia gives them a lot of really nice missiles and shit. If you guys know about the Malaysian flight that was flying over Ukraine that got shot down, guess who did that? The separatists with Russian missiles. Fucking great shit, right? Absolutely just the most based shit you could possibly imagine. But there is a problem, right? Because Ukraine has a lot of backing from the United States and other Western countries, this uprising in Ukraine didn't really go as planned, right? Putin thought that he could fund the separatists, give them a fuckload of missiles, give them a fucking shitload of weapons and guns, and they could just roll through a weakened Ukraine and, take it over for Mother Russia. That didn't happen, though. And because that didn't happen immediately, and Putin had put such an importance on the reunification of Ukraine, or why it was important for Ukraine to be part of Russia, right? Because of that, he couldn't back down. So there's been this kind of Cold War in Ukraine between the U.S. and Russia, because Ukraine wanted to join the EU, right? There's just been this total Cold War going on. And now with 100,000 soldiers massing on the border of Ukraine, it could be the case that Russia is planning on invading Ukraine. This is fucking terrifying because we don't want we live in a more civilized world than we did a couple of decades ago, where, countries who wanted something or wanted some land could just like roll in there and take it over, right? We have the United Nations now. We have international law that makes it to where people get to vote on their self-determination, right? They've been doing bombings like crazy. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the war that's been going on there is really fucking bad. And the people that get overwhelmingly fucked over in this, it isn't the governments of Ukraine or Russia. It's the people of Ukraine, because most of the things that get bombed, most of the things that get targeted are water supplies or food supplies and shit like that, right? So this is kind of terrifying when you take into consideration Russia's kind of prolonged attack on Western powers, with interference into voting, with interference into not just voting, but elections in general. It's a kind of a scary prospect if they're feeling, skippy enough to just do a flat out fucking invasion, right? I have friends that live in the shelling areas and are part of the volunteer forces. It's very scary living in the middle of a war zone. Oh yeah, I imagine. Here, we can look at this really quick.
3,000 kilometers away from Iran, another conflict is brewing at the crossroads of Russia and Europe. You're talking about Ukraine. Russia is being accused of massing troops along Ukraine's eastern border. Moscow calls it an act of deterrence and blames the West for curating this crisis. Kiev, on the other hand, says this is an act of aggression over the likely induction of Ukraine in the NATO. What is the reality? What is the root of this problem? What is their history? And of course, the biggest question of them all, is a war now inevitable? Here's a report.
Just so you guys know, NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I hope I have that correct. NATO. North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Basically, it was created in the wake of World War II, with all of the Allied powers, most of the countries in Europe and in the United States. This is one of the big things that really put the United States as a world superpower. And it was in direct opposition to the USSR, right? So a lot of Eastern European countries, right, splitting Germany in half, right, were Russian satellite states, right? Ukraine, Romania, Belarus, like all these countries over here were largely taken over by Russia and inducted into like the broader USSR kind of sphere. NATO was meant to fight back against that. So we have like Germany and France and in the United Kingdom. I don't know about Spain, but possibly Spain. Basically as a deterrent. If you fuck with Germany, if you fuck with France, then the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, everyone's going to come after you, right? When Ukraine wants to join that now, right? Because you get trade deals, you get better relations, you get all sorts of benefits from being in NATO, in the same way that you get a lot of benefits from being in the EU. When Ukraine wanted to join that became a problem for Russia, right? Because it's still in opposition to Russia at this point, because Russia, after the fall of the Soviet Union, and then once Putin rose to power, became another antagonizing force for NATO countries, right? And there's another, I forget the name of this alliance, but there's another alliance between the United States, Japan, Australia, and South Korea that protected us on our western coast, right? So because of that, that's why Ukraine wants to join into NATO. That's why they want to join the EU, because of economic and military prosperity, right?
After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ukraine gained independence, and its map looked like this. But today, it looks like this, with the Ukrainian peninsula, known as Crimea, controversially annexed by Russia, and the Donbas region in the east increasingly under Russian control.
Yeah, and also, I forgot to mention, there's a ceasefire. This line right here is a ceasefire between the separatists and the Ukrainian government, right? The Ukrainian government is also funding other paramilitary groups, some of which are right-wingers, which is why a lot of stupid fuck, dumb fuck tankies will say that the Ukrainian government itself is some sort of Nazi state itself, but that's just not true. There's never a ceasefire? Well, that's what was supposed to happen. It's been routinely broken by the separatist groups that are funded by Russia.
This is where the current conflict is brewing. To understand why, let's rewind to last month. On the 26th of March, 4 Ukrainian soldiers were killed by pro-Russian separatists. The killings contravened a ceasefire brokered in 2020 and ended a year of relative calm. In the 17 days that have followed, the situation has become quite precarious. Thousands of soldiers have descended on the border. So have dozens of tanks and missile launchers. Ukraine calls it an unwarranted provocation against its sovereignty.
Yeah, those tanks, Russia has a lot of tanks. 1 second. How many tanks does Russia have? I'm pretty sure Russia has more tanks than the US government does. 4,500 T-80 main battle tanks. They have a fuckload of tanks. That is where their primary military might comes from. And the only reason that Ukraine hasn't been annexed yet is because of those missiles that we send to them, right? We send them anti-tank missiles so that if Russia decides to roll in, all their shit's just going to get blown the fuck away.
We clearly understand the scale of Russian military presence next to our border. I would like to specify that the question of war depends only on Putin.
Russia calls it escalated hysteria about a mythical threat.
Troops are being transported there. Mobilization plans, calls for reservists are being renewed. Ukrainian media is escalating hysteria about the Russian mythical threat, about plans of Moscow attacking Ukraine practically tomorrow. All this is happening at the behest and open support of Western curators of Kyiv.
So both Moscow and Kyiv deny stoking up tensions. Then what exactly is happening, and why is it happening? The root of the problem is Ukraine's geographical and demographic makeup. As a former Soviet territory, Ukraine is divided between an eastern region with close historical and cultural ties to Russia, and the rest of the country, which identifies as more Ukrainian than anything else. The east has been the hotbed of rebellion and pro-Russian sentiment. The rebels allegedly receive support from Moscow and have played a key role in keeping the conflict.
Allegedly. Everyone recognizes that there is no way that they could possibly be getting the arms from anywhere except for Russia because of the kinds of arms that they have. It's Russian fucking military weapons. So the only reason that they don't acknowledge it because it's against international law to try and, invade other countries.
Simmering. Since 2014, 13,000 civilians, 4,100 Ukrainian troops, and 5,650 pro-Russian separatists have been killed in this conflict. To put an end to it, the Ukrainian government is pushing for a NATO membership. And this is where things get even more complicated.
Yep.
For NATO and Europe, this means influence on another one of Russia's borders. But Moscow views it as an existential threat. It has billions of dollars invested in Ukraine. A large part of Russian oil exports flow through the country. And of course, there's a sizable population of pro-Russian people who want to secede from Ukraine. The stakes are quite high. The prospects for a solution quite low. The implications for Europe quite severe. And reports of a looming Third World War quite frightening. Bureau Report, WION. World is one.
Is this the same video, Baseball?
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.
Thank you so much, lady. So yeah, that's a basic rundown of what's been going on. Now, the implications here are really, really fucking bad because we really, really, really don't want to have any kind of full-scale war go on with a NATO member and Russia, and that's why they're trying to, increase pressure on Ukraine right now. They're trying to scare them out of joining NATO, right? I understand why Russia wouldn't want them to be there because NATO is pretty much at this point, at all points, it's always been in opposition to Russia, but before it was just for Soviet Russia. But Russia has been doing just the most abhorrent shit all over the fucking place with election interference in the United Kingdom. I think there's also been some in France, and it's not the kind of election interference that some people would have you think, where they're like hacking into voting booths and shit like that. It's propagating misinformation. It is creating troll accounts to try and sow discord and ultimately push people into just fucking hating each other. That's why Russia supported Donald Trump, because he was such a fucking shit show of a president that they got away with a lot of shit, especially in Syria after the election of Donald Trump, right? The people of Syria got fucked over because Russia got to basically run in there and help occupy it with the Syrian or the pro-Syria government forces, So what every country does? Sure, it's what every country does. But at the same time, I think that some countries are better than others. I don't think that Russia is a particularly great place, especially considering the fact that they are anti-democracy, kind of authoritarian shit kickers. Like they're just fucking. The government of Russia is fundamentally anti-democracy. You can see that in the fact that they've had the same president for like the past 25, 30 years, almost. So it's indisputable that this is something that they want to do to try and keep Ukraine out of NATO. They want to exert more soft power, or I guess in this case, hard power with troops, further and further west into Europe. Ultimately, Russia's military is still scary, even though the U.S., if the U.S. and Moscow went to war, the U.S. would probably win, but it would be really, really fucking bloody, right? And it would probably be not on any of our, it wouldn't be on our borders. It would be, in Ukraine. It would be in other countries. So it really sucks for the people there, right? And you can see even in chat right now, people arguing over whether Russia is based or not. Please no world war, that would be gay and cringe. I super agree with that. Haas says China-Russia alliance would crush US and allies. China, maybe, but I don't even know about that. The US military is just so much overwhelmingly has so much overwhelming power compared to almost any other country, even combined countries, right? Napoleon, Hitler, Biden, good luck. Are you saying that all three of these people are the exact same? You guys are gonna fucking trigger the fuck out of me. Would China jump in if we did? It's very possible, right? So it all hinges on whether or not Ukraine actually gets to join NATO or not, which I guess we're going to have to see.